Well, joining me now in the studio is financial commentator Bernard Hickey from interest.co.nz. Welcome along, Bernard. They want to change, they've got change. Initially, what's this going to mean for the wider euro community?
Well, it puts in doubt the great austerity plan that was proposed by the Germans and agreed to by the French under Sarkozy. Now that is in doubt because Hollande says we want to renegotiate this austerity plan, one that most of Europe had signed up to and that the markets were expecting Europe to deliver on. Now there is uncertainty about that, and we've seen the reaction on markets today.
It would seem a fairly obvious formula. We have to bring in austerity measures because we've got no money. The French people are saying, and there's now promised, what, 60,000 more teaching jobs, and the money comes from where?
Well, they borrow it, and that's the problem for the markets. They've already lent a lot of money to the French and the Germans, and particularly the Italians and the Spanish. And now the markets are saying, you want more from us? Well, we'll start putting up the price. And that's the problem for the likes of France and certainly Spain and Italy. As they borrow more, as the costs rise, as their economies fail to grow, the weight of that debt drags down on their economies and potentially pushes them into a deleveraging death spiral. And that's the problem for Spain in particular, and we'll see whether it hits France as well.
At the other end of the spectrum in this whole financial crisis, of course, you've got Germany, who is one of the few who are, well and truly keeping their head above water. Early days yet, but what have they made of this result and the possible direction now of France?
Well, Angela Merkel, the Chancellor, has asked for an urgent meeting with the new French President, Francois Hollande. Essentially, she wants him to change his mind, to go back to the austerity pact, and to keep on this pathway, which now many economists and certainly the voters are saying is not going to work to get Europe out of its crunch. Essentially, the problem for Europe is that without control over their monetary policies and their currencies, many of these countries can't dig themselves out without decades of austerity. And voters are just not going to put up with it. And we've seen that today in Greece and in France, and of course as the elections roll through Europe, we'll see it again.
You've been in France up until a couple of days ago for a month. Was there the feeling that this has to happen, this is a country that has to have change, or it's going to go the way of so many other eurozone countries?
Like many democracies, some people are doing okay. There are some people who are very well off. But it was noticeable the number of homeless people on the streets in France. And also the posters for the politicians. You could tell who was the least popular by the amount of defacing there was on their posters. And it was clear that Sarkozy was unpopular just by watching the way that people were talking about it and how things were going. But it was a surprise, really, that he lost so comprehensively. And now that the markets are surprised about this, we'll see what happens in coming days. There's a lot of uncertainty, and it's already affected not just global markets, but in New Zealand, where the New Zealand dollar has fallen quite sharply, and also New Zealand interest rates are down as well.
Sarkozy is the 11th euro leader to go in the last 3 years since the eurozone crisis really started biting in. Would it be fair to say that Hollande is perhaps the most important new head of a country? Everyone's looking to him to do something.
Yes, certainly in the core of the euro you have France and Germany. And with France, which in many ways has led Europe, when you have a change of leadership like that, a change back to a socialist leader, remember they haven't had one for close to 20 years or so, and also the defeat of an incumbent, they haven't had that for 30 years. So this shows that French voters are grumpy. And the results in Greece are particularly worrying because we've seen there the rise of the neo-Nazi movement with the Golden Dawn party, which actually wants to shut the borders and place mines to blow up anyone who comes along.
Which sounds like a really rational, well-thought plan. I thought they were going to be a bit silly about it, but clearly they've thought it right through. So as far as his first move, given the austerity measures that have been in place and given that it's going to be borrow, borrow, borrow to get further forward, what can we expect from Francois Hollande in the coming weeks?
Well, the question is, will he row back on his promise to end the austerity? Will he be able to employ those 60,000 teachers and to spend that money on infrastructure? Will he be able to go into the bond markets and borrow that money? How high will interest rates get pushed by the bond markets, by the bond market vigilantes? And how much pressure will there be on French and German banks? Because they're the ones who will have to take the losses if these bonds are downgraded.
There's been a lot of talk about this for about 3 years, but if he doesn't get it right and the wheels do fall off France completely and you've only got Germany as the shining... Is this effectively going to be the beginning of the end of the euro?
Well, a lot of people are now worried about the euro. It's been an open question for the last year or so, and with all the Greek drama, people thought that was behind them, and after the European Central Bank intervened just before Christmas and again at the end of February with a lot of liquidity, cash being pumped into the system, they thought was fixed. But now with France wobbling and fears about this austerity pact, the doubts about the euro are well and truly back on the centre stage.
All right, Bernard, thank you. Bernard Hickey.